Hey folks, I'm Chuck Black. We're doing Quokka Prime from scratch, and we're talking about service monitoring. And we talked about what it is and how it worked, and we copied over some code. In this lesson, we're going to go through the code in more detail. So let's get started. So you can see I have service monitoring running. Over here I have the Quokka server. It's getting the services requests for gets and puts. And down here I have the display. But what I haven't done is gone through the details of what service monitoring is and does. So that's what we're going to look at here. So this is the service monitor Python module. And this is the service monitor class, which I've defined in order to implement inheritance and other object-oriented stuff for doing the actual service monitoring. We'll get into that in a minute. What I'm intending to have us look at that you may not have seen before, first of all, is this parsing of arguments. So I allow arguments to be passed in, and I'm using this thing called argparse, which you see I've imported, which is a popular way to gather arguments that get passed when somebody runs the command. This allows me to specify the pool size. I'm doing concurrency here using thread pools, and so I can specify how many threads I want to use. I did that in the 52 Weeks of Python course where I taught people, and you can look at it as well about concurrency and using thread pools. And so that's a carryover from that, but I figured I'd leave it in there. And then Quokka, where is the Quokka server located? So this is set up so that the monitors can be run on different systems, and they can actually be distributed in the network, and you can pass it in. And as you can see, there are default values defined. So when you run the service monitor, you don't even have to pass any parameters in. The default is 10 for the number of threads that I'll create. And the default here, which I had to change from Quokka Prime because I'm running the Quokka server service on port 5000. I was using 5001 before. And so basically that is the first thing that I wanted to mention. All you need to do is define it and then say argparse, and then the way that you refer to them is you do args.poolSize, and you can look this up. Pool size gets you this value, that's how it knows about it, and args.quokka gets you this value. And again, if the default if nothing is specified, then the default is used. That's the first thing. So the general structure of the service monitor is basically the same, and I've gone over this before. It's basically the same as what we've done in host monitor and device monitor, where I'm getting all of the services from the Quokka server, and then we're going to use those. This discovery, if you recall, in the device monitor, I actually changed this name of this function to not be discovery, because discovery is really misleading. I'm reading from a file called services.yaml, and so I haven't actually changed that because I use this pretty much as it was. Update service is going to do the opposite, where it's going to do a put command. So I'm doing a put to my URL here, services URL, and I'm passing in this information. Again, this is the same thing I've done with devices as well as hosts. So that is good. I have my service status. This is where I'm actually going to be invoking the object-oriented stuff, and we're going to need to go through that. So I'm going to go through that in a minute. And my main loop is where I'm actually just going to be doing a true while true loop, and I'm going to go through and explain to you what this thread pool executor stuff is. So that's kind of a general overview, plus a definition of what argparse allows me to do in terms of getting the parameters that are passed. Next, we'll look at in detail at the concurrency as well as the object-oriented stuff that I'm doing. So let's talk first about the concurrency that we're using in Service Monitor. So this main loop in host monitor and device monitor, if you recall, I have a while loop, a while true loop, and then within it I have a for loop where I go through and I do all of the requests for monitoring independently one at a time. What we do here in this situation is, and this is what we did in Quokka Prime, is we're going to use concurrency. That is, we're going to launch a bunch of threads that are simultaneously going to go out and perform the function that we need to do. And the way that we're going to do that is using this thing called thread pool executor. Now, if you want more information about this, you can go to my 52 weeks of Python examples. I have week 45 that's an overview of concurrency. I think week 46 that's not shown here may go into more details about the thread pools. I'm not exactly sure, but you can go look at those certainly if you want to. But the fact is that you can just hang along with me and see if you get the general idea. I'll try to paint a picture for you. So basically, we use this thing called a thread pool executor. And what that allows me to do is it allows me to specify the size of the thread pool. That means I will have this number of concurrent requests being made at the same time. The thread pool size can be small or it can be quite large, and depending on the size of the system on which you're running, having a larger amount may be a good idea. And what we do with this type of pattern in terms of how we're doing it is I'm going to use this thing that gets created from thread pool executor. I'm going to call it executor, and then I'm going to do executor.map. And what this is going to cause to happen is this. It is going to call this function. This is my get service status, which is the thing up here. It's just going to call this function, and it's going to pass in the service. And what it's going to also do is it's going to pass in, every time it calls a new thread, every time it launches a new thread, it's going to take one of the services. Remember, services is the thing that I will have gotten. That's what happens right here. I say get services, and this is in a dictionary of services that I retrieved. And since it's a dictionary, I only want the values. This will give me a list of the services. If you don't understand this, you'll need to look into thread pool executor type stuff that I describe that's online as well in order for you to understand this. But basically, it's going to launch the max workers number of threads simultaneously. And basically, in my situation, they're all going to run at the same time. Since they all do networking, that is going to be I/O. It's going to be blocked on I/O much of the time, making these networking requests. And consequently, we can overlap all of these requests at the same time. And all the service status will happen. And at the very end, we're going to look at this in a second, but every one of these service status things will run. And at the end, that service will get updated. This is an example of it running. When it does run, it goes out and it does things pretty much simultaneously and updates the service status via the REST API. And then when you look at the, let's see, where is my UI terminal? This is the result of it. This is the display that goes and grabs it from the Quokka server. There you can see it running. It started them all pretty much at once and updated them all pretty much at once. So you can see how nice that concurrency stuff is in terms of getting things to run in a much more efficient manner than it would have when we did them one at a time. Now the next thing I want to describe for you is this object-oriented stuff. So here you see I'm creating something called a HTTP monitor. Here I'm creating a DNS monitor. Here I'm creating an NTP monitor. Here I'm creating an ICMP monitor. What is all of that about, and what's all this business? Well, I'm not going to be spending all of the time describing all of this for you in terms of everything you need to know about object-oriented stuff. I did go to my page once again on YouTube. There is this explainer on object-oriented programming that can give you a little bit of an overview of what it is. If you want more details, you can go, I would say, starting at week number 35. Here's a nice 50-minute description of object-oriented programming. Week 36, I simulated a device using object-oriented. Week 37, I talk about inheritance, and when I do inheritance, I believe I'm doing this service monitoring, but I gotta be honest with you, I can't actually remember exactly if I did this or not. So yeah, you can stick along with me, but if you go week 35, 36, and 37, this will give you a general idea of what exactly object-oriented programming is if you need that type of background. Now let's look at what it is that I'm doing here. HTTP monitor, if I were to go up here, you'll see that from service monitor, I'm importing HTTP monitor, DNS monitor, NTP, ICMP monitor. And so what is service monitor? Well, you see that thing right there? I defined that. That is my Python module. So let's go take a look at it and let's see what it does. And I'm going to describe this for you at a relatively high level. So I just defined this thing called service monitor. And the service monitor is what we are going to be, what we call a base class. A base class is intended to have other classes derived from it. So this is a generic service monitor, and in it I define the data that I'm going to be using. I'm also here defining a function that I'm going to implement, but you see, if I just try to create a service monitor object, I'm going to have a not implemented error, because what I need to do is I need to create something like HTTP monitor, which is going to inherit from service monitor. That means this data I'm inheriting, and also any of these methods that I don't override. Now I've made it so that I need to override get status, and if you look at my code here for HTTP monitor, I'm overriding get status. For DNS monitor, I'm overriding get status. For NTP monitor, I'm overriding get status. And for ICMP monitor, I'm overriding get status. What this allows me to do is in my code here, when I'm trying to get service status, then once I've created my monitor, I do not need to know what type of monitor it is. I can just call this function get status, and I know it's going to return to me the availability and response time. However it does that, I may have no idea. Somebody else may have implemented these HTTP, DNS, NTP monitor, or any others that might be created. I don't have to know anything about it. All I have to know is that I can call get status, and I will get this information back. So this is how we do it. Basically, we define the base class. We define the data. Each one of these pieces of data will have, each one of these objects that we create will have this data inside it. And then HTTP monitor, DNS monitor, etc. Every time I call get status, you can see some of these actually involve a fair amount of work here. So I'm actually having to do a fair amount of stuff to get my DNS monitor to work and to return the information that I need to return. So that is it's the magic of object-oriented programming. Allows me to have a very uncomplicated service monitoring code right here. All I need to do is create the correct type of monitor, and then I can call get status and get that information back. When I do that, over here you can see I'm updating the service status, and that allows me to have this thing right here, which is representing the data that actually is getting updated as we're talking about this right now. Yeah, you see this is 11:30, and I've got all these new values that have gotten printed out. And if you want to know more about service monitoring, etc., I talk about it elsewhere in terms of my display, how I'm actually trying to display it in green if it's good. If it's good, but my response time is higher than I expect it to be, then that number is actually going to be turned this cyan or whatever that color is. And if I can't get a hold of it, this is a laptop that I have actually put away and isn't even plugged in, then I'm getting false, so my availability is false. Yeah, hopefully that describes enough of what this object-oriented stuff, this service monitor, etc. is, and that is how we do service monitoring. Hey, thanks for watching this episode on Quokka Prime from scratch. I'm Chuck Black. If you do have questions or comments, feel free to leave a message with this video. I'm also on Twitter at Chuck A. Black. If you want to send email with a question, comment, or just to say hi, the email address you can reach me at is python.52.weeks@gmail.com. Also, remember to subscribe to this channel. I hope these lessons are helping you to achieve your goals towards becoming a real software developer. So long for now, and see you at the next episode.